Welcome to Outworld. This progressional development series is going to be covering my work on the game and explaining to you what I am doing with concept art, design, story arcs, game lore for the world, and just where I am in the production process. This video, Where Did Outworld Come From?, is going to be covering the origins behind the project itself, all the way from its scattered beginnings to the more direct and linear work that I'm doing right now. When I first began Outworld, I didn't really have any direction at all. Like I said, it was very scattered. I had the idea for it to be a small-scale, simplistic project, and I didn't even have a name for it yet. I was intending for it to be two-dimensional, top-down, and very like the old Game Boy RPGs from the 90s and early 2000s, something kind of Pokemon-styled. I had a crisis in mid-September of the first year that I was working on this. And I really had to rethink everything that I was doing with the game. I had to think about, well, do I really want to do something that I know I can do? I've done all these things before, I just haven't put them together. So is it really worth my time to do something that I know I'm capable of, or would it be more worth it to push myself, to challenge myself? And I decided that I did want that challenge. I wanted something that would not only push my boundaries further than they had been pushed before, but would also be competitive with current and next-gen games on the market. So then I had to decide, well, am I being too ambitious? And quite frankly, maybe I am. You know, you don't just jump into the game industry with a competitively advanced and large-scale game. It's not what you do. You work your way through it. So, yeah, maybe I am being too ambitious. My thought process was, before I learned to walk, and this is totally true, before I learned to walk as a kid, I learned to jump. And then I learned to run, and then after I knew that I could do all the hard stuff, I knew for a fact that I could walk. And that's really kind of how I approached life. Ever since I was a little kid, my whole life I've always jumped in first and thought later. I've tackled step 10 before I went to step 2. And I don't know, I guess it's just the way I'm wired. But I didn't really see why this should be any different, even though it's a much bigger thing. And I thought, well, even if I do fail, I'll learn a lot in the process, and it'll be totally worth it every step of the way. And I'll have all these ideas that I've worked on that I can use again. So with that in mind, I made the official decision to take this up to the highest notch I could. And within minutes of making that decision, I had the word Outworld pop into my head. It was just this meaningless word at the time. It had nothing to do with anything, and it was just there. But it really appealed to me. So I sat down for a couple minutes, and I was like, all right, well, what does this sound like? And what images does it bring to my head whenever I think about it? And it really was kind of an amalgamation of a lot of ideas and concepts I had latched onto over the past few years. Mainly the idea of these badlands, kind of a place where freedom was an integral and natural part of it, but at the same time you had to defend that freedom from other people. Somewhere that was dangerous at the same time as being open and exciting. Somewhere that you could live the way you wanted to, as long as you could defend that lifestyle. And where anyone could be anybody that they wanted. So with that in mind, I sat down with a notebook this time and just thought about Outworld, thought about those ideas that had come into my head, and just drew whatever came out of my pen. Eventually, I had a small page of concept doodles that ended up developing into more interesting ideas and scenes. And I worked on more and more pages and decided to sit down and start working on, well, what does Outworld mean? Now that I have all of these ideas, all of these pictures that kind of go along with it, what is Outworld? And so I sat down and I put everything in front of me, and I thought about everything that I had thought about while I was working, and went over all of the ideas that I had, and thought, well, the best sentence that I could sum all of this up is, Outworld is a journey through a really, really vast world that is about answering personal questions. And so then I had to make these fundamental decisions, and I had to kind of break that down piece by piece and just think about the setting of the game, the story of the game, and how it would be played in general, what the gameplay mechanics would be like. I go more into depth in all of those fundamental decisions in my introduction video, What is Outworld? But I took each question independently. I answered them by themselves and then kind of worked through it to attach them to each other, find ways for them to interlock. And they almost did it by themselves. As I was coming up with all these ideas and these decisions, I really kind of witnessed them building themselves into something. And it just felt more natural as I went along. So from there, I started doing even more detailed visual notes. These pictures of creatures and factions and groups, and eventually I had a protagonist that I was working with, somebody that I really felt embodied the spirit of the game and the world itself, and somebody without whom the story really wouldn't happen. I came up with these antagonists, these other people that were in some ways opposite the protagonist, but in some ways almost exactly the same. And just different people, different groups that would interact in an opposing way to the protagonist that would build up the story and continue it on in its direction. With all of these things done, I decided that it was time to officially begin production. I went out, got an actual development journal so that I could put down everything that I was working on in a centralized location, and where I could reiterate ideas and work on them until I really felt that they had a distinct look, but something that was similar enough to each other that they all fit into the same world. Then I had to decide, well, how am I going to share this with people? Because that's a very important part of it to me. This isn't just something that I'm doing for myself. It's not a game that I'm making so that I can play it. It's a game that I'm making so that I can share these ideas and this world with other people. Something that really is about bringing a community together around it and just being like, hey guys, I have this really cool thing that I worked on and this really cool idea in my head. I want to share it with you. And that's really what game making has always been about for me. And not just video games, but whenever I'm a dungeon master for Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that, play any tabletop RPG, that's what it's all about. It's about sharing this world. That's why I love it so much. Because if I just wanted to keep the ideas for myself, then I wouldn't do any art. I wouldn't play Dungeons and Dragons. I wouldn't make video games. They're all in my head. They're already there. So it really was about sharing this community experience with everybody else. And I wanted to work on that from the beginning and include as many people as I could through the process of producing it and through the development of it. And so I had to think, well, what's the best way to include people? Because I know it's not just posting scattered pictures with ambiguous captions on the internet. And I was like, all right, well, developer diaries, something that catalogs and documents my process so that I can kind of look back on it and go, well, this is where I did this and this is where this happened. But at the same time that I could share with everybody and say, hey, look, watch this and you'll learn more about this game. So then I started writing scripts and I started working on this and told everybody about it. And now we're here. I hope that you enjoyed learning more about Outworld and where it came from in my head. If you haven't watched it yet and you want to learn more about those fundamental decisions that I made, you can go watch the introduction video for this series, What is Outworld, and that'll explain that. If you are interested in learning more about the game, the next video that I'm going to be posting will be about the protagonist, where they came from, who they are, and why they're so important to this story. I want to thank you guys again for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon.